Thank you everyone for joining us. We are so excited to have you here at our FloridaRAMA book club. We are super excited and really proud to be collaborating with Keep St. Pete Lit and Tombolo Books. Keep St. Pete Lit celebrates and promotes Greater St. Pete's literary community through arts, education, events. Fairgrounds will donate all of our profits from tonight's book club to their ongoing efforts. So seriously, thank you so much for all of your support. In addition, we are super excited to support our community by partnering with Tombolo Books, a locally owned independent bookstore in St. Pete's Grand Central District. You can check out their super cute shop and grab this month's pick, last month's pick, and next month's pick right by the door. I am Liv Scully. I am the education manager here at Fairgrounds St. Pete. And if you're new to Fairgrounds St. Pete, we are a very soon to open, 15,000 square foot arts and technology destination. And we started FloridaRAMA Book Club really to discover together all the weird, wacky, and wonderful things that we love about our Sunshine State. We hope that you leave every conversation and question with our author really feeling excited to live here. This month's pick, we are super excited to have the story collection Milk, Blood, Heat. And we are so excited to have the author Dantiel W. Moniz with us here tonight. Mm-hmm. Be sure to stick around at the end of the Zoom because we are going to announce our next pick and author conversation. And just a friendly reminder that you are all invited to join these conversations with these authors, even if you haven't had the opportunity to read the books yet. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our host, Maureen McDole, the founder and executive director of Keep St. Pete Lit.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you for having me. Right, jazz hands. Thank you. This is our second FloridaRAMA book club. We are so grateful to partner with the Fairgrounds and Dantiel. Thank you for being here with us. And you want to read a submission of your book, the story, the opening story, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to read us just the first section of Milk, Blood, Heat title story.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So you don't need to know anything. We're starting at the beginning. So 1, monsters. Pink is the color for girls, Kira says. So she and Ava cut their palms and let their blood drip into a shallow bowl filled with milk, watching the color spread slowly on the surface, small red flowers blooming. Ava studies Kira, how she holds her hand steady, as if used to slicing herself open, while sunlight falls through the kitchen window and fills her curls with glow. Her mouth is a slim, straight line, but her eyes are wide, green-yellow, unblinking. Strange eyes, Ava's mother always says, with the same pinched grimace usually reserved for pulling plugs of their hair from the bathtub drain. The girls are at Kira's because her parents believe in freedom of expression, and they can climb trees and catch frogs and lie on the living room floor with the cushions pulled off the couch, watching cartoons and eating sugary cereal from metal mixing bowls for hours. At Ava's house, they are tomboys, they are lazy, they are getting on her mother's last nerve. Her mother doesn't approve of Kira, but they've been friends for 2 months, ever since late August, when the 8th grade started, and Kira came up to her during gym and told her, "I feel like I'm drowning." And though there was no water in sight, Ava knew what she meant. It was the type of feeling she herself sometimes got, a heaviness, an airlessness that was hard to talk about, especially with her mother. Trying to name it was like pulling up words from her belly, bucketful after bucketful, all that effort, but they never meant what she wanted them to. This is one of many differences between her and Kira, that the truth about the two of them changed depending on which mother was telling it, and Ava often wonders if their differences are only because Kira is white, or if there's something more, something beneath the skin. This year, she's become obsessed with dualities, at looking at one thing 2 ways. Kira's eyes, strange and magic, her own sadness, both imaginary and pulsating. "Get a spoon," Kira says, and from the drawer, Ava grabs a large one with slots. She stirs the milk and blood until it is the desired shade, the pink of Kira's lips, a soft, hopeful color. They tip the bowl up to their mouths, one after the other, sip for sip, until there are only dregs. They wipe pink froth from their faces with the backs of their arms and sit still for a moment, solemn in the wake of what they've just done. "Blood sisters," Ava murmurs, feeling somehow stretched in time, another sensation she can't explain. She imagines she can feel Kira's blood absorbing into her system, passing through the mucous membrane of her small intestine, assimilating until there is no difference between her blood and her friends. Blood sisters, Kira agrees, and leaves the bowl, spoon, and knife in the sink for her mother to wash. This is the hour of reckoning, or at least this is what they shout as they flock toward the retention pond behind Kira's house, kicking up grass and startling the neighborhood dogs into song. They drop small stones into the water, watch the tadpoles scatter, and count the ripples. Run, little guys, Kira says, her voice small and high like an actress in a bad horror film. Ava stomps and snarls in the shallows. She's still wearing her low tops, her socks full of pond, water squishing between her toes. She is Frankenstein's monster. She is a vampire queen. She is newly 13, hollowed out and filled back up with venom and dust cloud dreams. She throws her head back and howls at the sun, pretending it's a strange burning moon and that there is no other world than this one where she and Kira are. Kira thunks down onto the bank, sitting with her legs pulled up and her arms draped across the tops of her knees, watching Ava. Her hands dangle from her small wrists like claws. She laughs as Ava poses for her, thrusts her hips out at impossible angles, and squinches her eyes tight. Kira pretends to snap photos with her hands, diving onto her stomach to make sure she gets the shot. You're a sexy monster, she screams, swooping to the edge of the pond for a close-up, splashing water so that the droplets hang in the air for barely a moment, rainbow-colored. Say it, be it. I'm a sexy monster, Ava repeats and bares her teeth. Kira yanks her arms and they fall into the grass, a giggling heap of girl. They catch their breath and wait, for their hearts to stop thudding, for the warmth to drain from their cheeks. They wait for the howling they don't voice to quiet. It never does. Instead, it evens out, a thin purr that lives inside their rib cages and the webbing of their fingers. Ava knows she really is a monster, or at least she feels like one, unnatural and unfamiliar in her body. Before 13, she hadn't realized empty was a thing you could carry, but who put it there? Sometimes she wonders if she will ever be rid of it, and other times she never wants to give it back. It is a thing she owns. Kira sits up and brushes the wet tops of Ava's sneakers. Your mom's gonna kill you. I'm gonna stop there.
Oh, I'm trying to clap and I got my bouncing my book. Yeah. Wow, this book, whenever I read a book for the book club, I always read it right up to like an hour before. So I'm still like in it. And these characters that you've written about, they're haunting. And I kept reading this going like, I don't know if I'd have the guts to write like this, you know, because so many of these subjects, I actually thought, are these the 7 deadly sins? Like that's where my brain went. So I like counted the stories and I was like, no, there's 11 stories. So that's no, but like, did you, because these are short stories, did you write them individually and then put them together? Or did you have like the overarching theme with the book in mind?
Yeah, I think, and this might be the case for many people, but like, I know it is for me, if I'm writing a short story or if I'm in the middle of a project, before I even know that it's a project, you know what I mean? I'm just kind of writing. So no, at first I was writing these stories and my thinking was like, you keep writing the same story over and over and you're just changing the character names. Like what's going on here? And then I realized, well, no, it's not the same story, but it is stories exploring the same sort of central questions, central themes, and I'm kind of turning it at different angles and, you know, putting those questions into the 3-dimensional worlds of these characters and letting them kind of explore it that way. So once I realized that, and that was maybe like 4, 5, 6 stories in, I can't really remember, then I was like, oh, maybe that's what a collection does. Maybe this is a collection. And so that's when I started intentionally writing the rest of them like, okay, now this is a collection.
Okay. So I like the way that they're like prisms of the same kind of, and all of these characters, to me anyway, feel like they're in this kind of limbo state or a transition state of grief or loss, or, I mean, suicide is a heavy topic, which is taboo in some ways to write about. And you write about miscarriage, you write about infidelity, you write about sexual relations between a teacher and a student while there's infidelity in the same household. Like, was there ever a moment in your head where you were like, oh, this is too risky, or were you just like, this is me? And because all your characters are like unapologetically themselves. So I'm thinking that reflects you as a writer. Did you ever have that moment where you're like, is this going to resonate with people? Or
Not resonate really, because I think what I'm trying to do with this book is capture the full experience of being human. The part, like you brought up, you know, some of the things are taboo. That's exactly right. There are parts of what it is to be human that is stigmatized, that is deemed inappropriate. And so like, that's what the intention was. But that being said, no, there were like 100 moments that I came up and I'm like, can I write this? Or am I going to get canceled off the earth if I write this? And when I came up to that, like, oh no, I don't know if I can write this. I don't know if like this is going to be okay. I kind of had to think, well, if it's something that's in your head, if you're thinking about it, surely other people are thinking about it, because that's the way humanity works. And so then I kind of felt like, well, if it's coming to me, then I kind of have to, I'm called to put it on the page, so I'm going to put it on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was like, you actually gave me courage as a writer, like to be, I have a tendency to try to wrap my poetry up a bit, just like a nice little bow at the end or something. But some of the strongest poems I've ever written don't do that. And I like that there isn't necessarily a resolution in a lot of your stories, because there isn't always a resolution in life. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I was reading this and I go, this book is the perfect tone of what we're in as a country right now. This kind of like, I mean, how long is this going to last? Is it really going away? Is it something we're just living with? And like with miscarriage, or even depression, or like these things, a lot of these characters, the trauma that they've gone through is never really going to leave them. So I wanted to ask about, did you specifically want to focus on short stories? Because that's kind of one of those mediums that, you know, you should do fiction, straight fiction, write a book, or poetry. And short stories are one of those kind of, and it might be changing now with people's attention spans or whatnot, but did you feel any kind of, like, no, I don't want to say rejection to short stories. I don't know what the word is. Like, did anyone go, short stories aren't sellable? Or you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
People, what I'm asking? Yeah, people feel that way, not anybody in my team, and which was very important to me. Good. I was, you know, talking with agents and talking with editors. It was like, you know, I talked to a lot of editors that were kind of like, oh, okay, these are these short stories that you're trying to sell, but are you working on a novel? You know what I mean? And it was like, sure, I know, I get it. Yeah, I get it. But like, for me, it was very important to be with people who were going to bring my book into the world, that understood that these are the art form that I'm doing right now. This is what I'm doing, and not use them as a vehicle for the novel. Mm-hmm. But they came to me as stories. I don't know if I'm a novelist yet. I'm remains to be seen. I haven't successfully finished a novel yet. I mean, I have a first draft, but we know what a first draft is, right?
Yeah.
It's like a mess. So, but yeah, they came to me as stories. I really love short stories. And I think, you know, I hear that a lot about, you know, stories are great for, you know, this ADD times, or like short attention span times. And I agree that short stories can be read in single sittings, right? But I don't agree that they require less attention. I think that sometimes short stories require more attention, because, you know, you have this scenario, like people have said a lot about my endings, where they're like, oh, they feel abrupt, or I feel like I didn't get the resolution. And I feel like I have given everything in a particular story to where you can kind of imagine like, what's the next step for this character. I love short stories that do that require me to do a little bit of work. But like, if I have done my job correctly, you can go back and see, okay, I actually can see where this is going for this character. And it's either like really hopeful, or it's like maybe not so great, like in the case of some of the characters. So yeah.
But I like that though. You know, that allows us to, or like, these characters are going to haunt me. You know, like I'm going to be thinking about these characters down the road, and I'll be driving and I'll be like, well, was that someone I knew? No, wait, that was from this book. But I like that you don't necessarily wrap things up in a bow. And I didn't feel that you didn't resolve. I think you did such a great job of like compacting. I mean, that is such a skill to write a good short story. It really is a skill. And I think that if you do it well, which you do, regardless if you ever write a novel, I think that you have mastered the art of short stories. And because I was so in every one of these stories, I was like in this character. I mean, I'm thinking about the gentleman at the bar whose wife is dying of cancer, and just the relationship he's having with the bartender. and I mean, I've been in those experiences, not that I had a relationship with a bartender, but you know, like when you're in like a transition phase and you have like your Cheers or your place that you go or your coffee shop, and you have these they're very transactional, but you feel a connection because they know you walk in and they're like, oh, would you like your what?
Yeah, they know you, or it feels like they know you, or they know the you that you want to be in those spaces, right? Which is like can be really important, especially if like the you who you're trying to present yourself as is this like, you know what I mean, put together whatever. And as in the case with that character, Fred. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned transactional relationships too, because that's something I'm definitely interested in the grand scope of things. Before I was ever like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm a professor, like whatever it is, I had only ever served or bartended or worked in retail or whatever.
I wondered if you were a bartender, because I'm thinking like she's done some service jobs. Like I could, because only anybody that's worked in a restaurant would, unless you like spent lots of time in a restaurant. I grew up in a restaurant, so I mean, you just had all of that down packed, of people filling in the shifts and, you know, hey, the nods and the looks and the, you know, the relationships with your employees who are your family or people you work with. So I was wondering about, are you a poet?
No.
But you are. As a poet, I'm reading this and I'm going like, this is pure poetry. Like the moment where they're driving down the street and the sky's changing the purple and then they kind of dissolve and they don't have a self. I mean, that was like pure poetry. I was like, whoa.
Okay, I'm gonna take that compliment because I think poetry is like the hardest thing to do ever in the world, and I'm like in awe of poets. I took a graduate level poetry class when I was in my MFA, and that's where I learned that I was not a poet. However, taking that class was really helpful for me because I think prose writers, I mean, this is something that I did before I took the poetry class. I'm very attentive to sound, the way a sentence sounds, the rhythm of a sentence. If a sentence doesn't sound right, it's not right. You know what I mean? And so I have to go and fix it. But it helped me, taking that poetry class helped me think about white space and silence in stories more intentionally, because I already kind of like had that gravitation, but like poets do that naturally. Poets like, how does this look on the page? What's, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I think more prose writers should pay attention to what their sentences sound like.
I have had poetry professors say that, like prose writers should take poetry classes.
They should read poetry and they should take poetry courses so they can, rhythm is so important. It's like, okay, yeah, you're reading it, but there's still a natural rhythm to a sentence. And when you read it out loud, you can hear that. And you can hear when it pitches, when it's not right, when you read out loud.
I also think, you know, like with what we've lost with digital film, someone told me once that when you watched film that was actually on film, there's white spaces in between the frames. Yeah. So your imagination is filling things in as you're watching this. Yeah. So that kind of white space in a poem, I thought that was beautiful. So as a white woman, I'm reading this and I'm very aware of race when I'm reading, and I was curious. I'm reading your stories and I'm going, you're mentioning the color of some of your characters, but the I'm trying to phrase this right. The experience, they were very like universal experiences in a lot of the stories, but then also kind of towards the end you slipped in like the eyes, how people follow them in the store and they don't necessarily trust them. And I was wondering, was that conscious to, because a lot of writers of color, it's very important to bring up the experience of race in their writing. Were you thinking of that consciously when you were writing, or were you just wanting to write characters that and show like this universal experience that someone's having? Did I frame that right?
No, I mean, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So first off, I will say that my intention with this book is not to teach anybody anything. I'm not trying to teach anybody a thing. You can read my book. You can like look up things that you like, you know, I didn't write the book for everyone. I do think anyone could get something from the book, can connect it to the book in any way. So what was important to me in describing, you know, these characters and their worlds was, I want to acknowledge the reality of the world that we live in, which means that we can't not acknowledge the systems that rule the world that we live in. We're talking about white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism mainly is what I'm focusing on in this book, which is like the three pillars, right, of like all of what we do. And so while I want, like, it would be like just not a thing for me to pretend like that's not happening, I also did not want a book where these characters are just constantly thinking about my race and, oh, I'm Black and it's hard. I mean, yes, that's really true, but also like sometimes I wake up and I'm not just thinking, oh, I'm Black. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, yeah, man, I got bills to pay. You know what I mean? We're thinking about the same things that everybody else is thinking about. And so for me, while, you know, there's stories where obviously it happens. So like the story you're talking about in Necessary Bodies, or, you know, the two characters go into the museum and they're not greeted. That's a microaggression. That's a microcosm of racism, of a white supremacist system, right? But like, it's just like a blip, and then they're going on about their lives. Oh, should I keep this baby that I have? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's more. So that's kind of, so yes, I am talking about it. Everything is intentional, but also it was very intentional for me to let characters live their lives, just like people are living their lives.
I love that. I was reading it and I was like, I think it's important, especially like that all people reading this book, there's something for everybody. Like and not that that's necessary, but I thought that the message and the stories that you were conveying, it kind of could fit anybody's experience. And I thought that was so beautiful. Yeah. And I love that you talked about miscarriage and the idea that the husband was like, it's been 8 months, and you didn't even mention until further into the story how long it would been. You actually mentioned it right when I go, how long has it been since her miscarriage? And then you said 8 months, and the husband was like, why are we still dealing with this? Why are you still? And then the hauntingness, like almost the horror of seeing body parts of her child. And speaking of horror, the second to the last story, which I thought of like Eyes Wide Shut, that kind of, and also an episode of Gossip Girl. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, I used to read those books. Oh my God, this is my book. I didn't watch the show, but like the books were like,
yeah. Well, that like the elite, the rich, and just that level of no rules, anything goes if you have money. And so, can I ask, like, they were eating a child, correct? Yeah, at that. So how did that story come about? Was that the idea of that? Because that was a horror. That was like a miniature.
So first of all, I'm glad that you bring up that story, because I feel like that's the story that nobody ever talks about usually. Like, you know, like, I think that's the story where people are like, I don't know what this story is doing in terms of like the rest of the collection, because it seems like an outlier, which it's actually really funny, because I'm doing the same thing in that story that I'm doing in all of the stories, examining the systems, examining identity, examining desire and stigma and, you know, all that stuff. But I'm doing it on a literal level, which makes it seem surreal.
Yeah.
But basically, with that story, I don't even remember. I think the first idea was just like, I was thinking about, you know, there's restaurants you can go to and you can like eat lion and like kangaroo and like, you know, just exotic meats or whatever. And I just had a thought of like, what if people are like eating people like somewhere? We don't know what the uber wealthy are getting up to. We don't have access to those spaces. And I'm not saying that they're eating babies, but I'm thinking about like, you know, but I am thinking about like what used to happen like during slavery, when they, you know, they would bathe in their slaves' blood and, you know, do these kind of things to like do beauty rituals or whatever. And then like on the other side of that, I have been thinking a lot about how our society always cannibalizes the young, cannibalizes youth, right? We use youth for everything. We use it to sell things, and we use it as a scapegoat. You know what I mean? Blame the youth, use the youth, like use up their youth, and then they're old, and then they don't know, like no one's prepared them to live like an older life. You know what I mean? You're only prepared to like be young, and then that goes away, and then you become embittered and you look at the next generation of youth. It's like a whole cycle. But so that's kind of where that story came from. I was just like, how would I put that? And so I wanted the story to be very short. I wanted it to be like, you could know what happened, but again, it's that close read, right? Because I never say like they're eating a kid, you know what I mean? But like, then it's also like, that story is really examining complicity, because the thing is that we are all complicit in the systems that run the world just by being alive and existing in them, right? So
I also like the brevity of it, because these people were there to like cater this event, which is not going to take that long. It might be a couple hours. So to have that, it encapsulated that kind of feeling of just like going in and you're the wait staff and you know, you're in this space, and the differences between the two, where the uber wealthy are considered the best kinds of people, and then the wait staff are like the underlings.
The underlings. But then it's also like, you know, it's unfortunate, but you know, for them, they're like, hey, this is just my job. I'm just doing my job. And like, how many systems are kept running by people just doing their jobs?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you and then the last story I loved, because I spent time in Asheville, North Carolina, and I have been to a couple of those kind of moon priestess events where like all these older women, a couple of them stripped naked. I was like, oh, this is new. Okay. Because but the way that it was another one of those characters where the mother's unapologetic. I love how you said that. Like she is who she is, and the mother got it. And then I felt it was so beautiful. It was redemptive at the end. The daughter kind of got that she is like her mother in all the good ways. And I thought that was
a power to it. Yeah.
That was a beautiful way to show a child, especially a lot of them are that turning point age, the teenage years, where you're making a decisions about who you are in the world. I have a 15-year-old, and it's just like, it's like, let me just hold space for you.
That's very kind. I feel like that doesn't, you know, maybe some people do that. Like you were doing that, but I don't think that's the case with a lot of people. It's like, oh, you're trying to do this thing now. You have your own will, and I'm going to bend you into this little box. I feel like, you know what I mean? It can be a really restrictive time period for people, because you're like, I'm trying to figure out who I am as a person. I'm not an adult, I'm not a kid. Now suddenly I'm responsible for like my behavior and my body, but no one will talk to me honestly about why that is.
Yeah.
I don't get it. And then you won't tell me. So now I don't want to listen to you. You know what I mean? So that's cool.
And you tied that back in with the story about the mother and the daughter, where the daughter is having the affair with the teacher, which you did such a good job of not going too deep into the affair. It was kind of implied, which when you're at that age and when you're doing something illicit like that, just those kinds of looks and the hand grazes when it's really private, and not that I've ever been in that situation, but you know, like those kinds of moments where no one's supposed to know, those are the charged. And you did that so well. And I love how the mother is kind of a fallen figure in the beginning of it. And you think that the daughter is upset with her, but it's actually that the daughter is not upset for the reasons that and so that kind of ties into the patriarchy and those concepts. Did you go into it thinking, did you hear, it kind of comes back to, do you hear a character? How do you get these stories? Does a character talk to you, or do you want to go around a theme?
It depends. So stories come to me kind of piecemeal. It's not all at one time. Like I'll get like, I call them seeds. It'll be like a seed will come to me, and it's like either an image or an idea that I had. Like, for example, for that story, I think the idea was like someone serves snails to, you know, another character. And so that was, I was like, oh, okay, so how could I make that work? And then like the other bits started filling in. So for me, it's usually not the characters that come to me first. It's the situation or the idea or whatever the image is. And then all the other stuff starts coming into place. So I'm like, okay, well, who would be in this situation? How does that work?
And you've used the word seeds. I noticed that a couple times in the book.
Okay.
I love it's good. It's like you're all over the book, which I love that, because some writers are just like, I don't know, it's not, but you're kind of all over the book, and I love that.
I mean, it came from me. It's like, you know what I mean? Like that. So I get a question, people like, oh, are any of these autobiographical, which I think is a thing that people ask women in particular. But like, I'm like, I mean, there are things that are true because some fiction also has truth in it, but also anything that's true in the book is just a jumping off point that I'm using to like really get down and deep into it. But then also it's like, well, I mean, kind of, it all came from me. So yeah, I mean, this is like, I don't want to say it's inside of my head, because when people get nervous, they're like, oh my gosh, she's dark. And I'm like, no, I mean, I think about the things that people don't want to think about. But like, I feel like is my job to do, because like, if you don't do that, if you're denying a whole part of yourself and humanity, then how can you like grow and move forward in a positive direction? I think.
I agree. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and we'll ask.
I love questions. So please, if you have anything, even if you're like, this is a small, dumb question, there are no dumb questions. We're just
Yeah.
talking.
Well, I've already covered a couple that I was a little afraid to ask, but so Florida is like throughout this book, and you're from Jacksonville, correct? So was that, you were conscious that you wanted it to be based in Florida? So do you feel specifically that you're a Florida writer, or do you think that, because some writers could write anywhere, but you, I mean, the sense of place, and even in the title, heat, I mean, when you think of Florida.
I'm writing about Florida right now. I'll say that. But I think that it was really important for me to actually write. I have ambivalent feelings about my hometown, and it's like, it's my mother. This is what raised me. This is where I come from. But also it's like, we have feelings, we have complications between us. But also I just really wanted to write about Florida and Jacksonville in particular, because when I grew up, I've been writing my whole life, but it took me until I was an adult to figure out like, oh, I could actually be a writer. That wasn't something that I was being prepared for in any kind of way, even though that's what I mostly did. And I think that Florida is not seen as a literary state, which is wild, because we actually have really rich literary traditions here. Like, Elizabeth Bishop and Hemingway like spent time writing in Key West. We have Dora Neale Hurston. We have it, but people don't see us that way. And I think particularly because of how we're portrayed in the news, which I think has a lot to do with elitism. You know what I mean? Like, oh, these dumb Southern rednecks, or whatever it is that people want to say, Florida man, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it was really important for me to write about the place where I'm from in a way that didn't contribute to stereotypes. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned St. Pete. It was neat to hear like St. Pete's like an oasis.
I went to college in St. Pete for like a semester at Eckerd, and it was really expensive, and so I had to leave. But like,
I did that in North Carolina one semester. So you have is the quote in the book by wonderful Zora: half gods are worshipped in wine and flowers, real gods require blood.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why you chose that quote?
Yeah, it just seemed honestly like perfect for the book, because it feels like, half gods are, worshipped in wine and flowers. That's frivolous, that's fun, that's fancy. You know what I mean? Like, but if you're really trying to do work on yourself and reflect on who you are, that's real work. That's real dirty, grimy kind of work that most people don't want to do, because it is hard to be really honest about who you are, especially if you've been made to feel ashamed about any aspect of who you are, which our society is really good about shame, because number one, it sells things, capitalism, and number two, it creates hierarchies of morality, right? So
Olivia just said you have a gorgeous book cover. Can you tell us about how or I think Liv, you wanted to ask about the cover, didn't you?
Yeah, so Olivia, she asked, can you talk about the art inspiration for the art of the book cover? And something that I had a question too was, I saw that in some early printings of it, there was that little orange dot.
I know, it went away. I didn't know it was going to go away.
Well, I wanted to know I remember seeing you so excited about it, and I was excited about it. And so I wanted to know, like, can you talk about a little bit more about that and like the art inspiration for your cover?
Yeah, so I did a Pinterest board when it was time for the cover, because obviously that cover aspect.
She's not muted. You might have to mute her.
Yeah, I muted her, so we should.
So the cover part of your book, like when you see that cover for the first time, like that's when the book feels really real. Yeah. And you dream about what it looks like. It didn't look anything like this, but I was like, oh, it's gonna be this beautiful. I want a beautiful book cover, all of this stuff. So I created a Pinterest board, and honestly, I put a lot of like texture was really important for me. I was like, I just would like to see like some texture, or here's some things. And so we gave it to the artist, and then I got a file with 3 files. Actually, I want to show you one. I'm gonna see if I can find it on my phone, because one of them looks so wild that like it's like so different from this, but. This was the first image in the file, and so I looked at it and I scrolled down to the other 2. Then I went back up and I was just like, I was like, because this is the one. I was like, I know it. I just felt it. So she got it on the first try. She had painted this, and then used and uploaded it. So that's why it had that little dot, because it was just like paint. I liked the dot, but then the dot was gone. So I was like, okay, not a big deal. But like if you look really close, you can see like the paint strokes in the oranges. Like it was painted. So. That's kind of how the cover came about. And I did miss the dot when it went. I liked it.
Yeah, I love that. And we chatted earlier about how Milk Blood Heat was published in the UK today.
Yeah.
And that is a different cover. So
super different.
what's the process of that, or like the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I guess between the US and the UK, they just have very different markets and how things are sold. So like they just were like, yeah, we're gonna take it in this other direction because we know our market and you know your market. And so it's a little bit, honestly, it's a little bit more literal, right? It's for me, it's like that moment where the girls are mixing the blood and they're doing a blood pact. You know what I mean? You can see the pink in there, there's some flame and all that stuff, but they're really different covers. I wanted that though. I was like, oh, I hope I get different covers. And also the book is going to be coming out in Germany and Italy at some point. And so like, I'm really hoping that they do their own covers too. Because I'm like, I want all the covers. Just give me all the different covers.
Yeah, that's always so cool to compare the covers of different books.
Yeah.
And translations.
Mm-hmm.
Always if you're like a book nerd.
Yeah.
It's always a cool. New Directions does this cool thing. Clarice Lispector, they did her face, and they did 4 of her books, and then each book, different part of her face. It's really cool, and you like put it together like a puzzle.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, like the separate books create the whole picture. Yeah, that's cool.
Wow.
So you said that you are right now. You're in heavy promotion of your book, correct?
It's winding down now finally, like, but yeah, I did 8 straight weeks before I had even one like week where I didn't have an event every single day of the week. And so like, but we're winding down now. I have like a couple more events this month and then 2 in June and then I have stuff in July and like, blah, blah, blah. We don't talk about that right now. We're in May. We're going to stay.
Yeah. But you said you're working on a novel right now.
I will be working on a novel. So like, I already have a first draft. I put it away for a really long time. I'm going to be really honest because I feel like people are afraid to be honest about this, which is, with the whole productivity thing. But like, I didn't write like at all in 2020, like period, nothing new. I mean, I wrote, but like it was for other people. Write this essay, write this, you know what I mean? But 2020 was hard for obviously a lot of reasons. So I didn't write. And then on top of that, even though book promotion is like fun, it's for you, it's for your book, it's also work. And so like, yeah, it's a lot. It's me having to be on, this event. And so like, but now that it's winding down, I've been getting so many ideas for the novel. And so like, I'm super excited to not be an author for a second and be a writer again.
Yeah.
They're different.
They are different. That's good that you say that because a lot of people don't realize the different hats that you have to wear to like be that creative. So what is your writing process? I'm always curious about that.
Yeah. I've never been a write every day kind of writer unless I'm like really into a project. But I think that also has to do with the fact that when I was serving and bartending, I only had like 2 days off, and I'm a really good worker. So I always like, no matter where I worked, I always got in with the manager. Was like, hey, whatever my 2 days are, just like put them together, please. You know what I mean? And so like,
I did too.
They would do that, and that was nice to have. And so I would, on my 2 days off, I would go to the coffee shop at 2 o'clock, because I'm an afternoon type of writer. 2 o'clock, I would stay till close, so if that's 10 or 11 or whatever. And I wouldn't be writing the entire time, but that was like my creative space. So I still kind of do that. I'm more like a marathon. I'll write from 2 to 10 o'clock or whatever it is. Which is sad because the whole can't go to coffee shops thing. So that's been a little terrible because I just like to be around different people. It's better for me when I'm outside of my house. You know what I mean? Like it's too much. I have an office space, but it's still really distracting to be in the house, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because Olivia just asked the question, what advice do you have for writers? And we did a series called Typewriter Talks where we interviewed like 40 different writers, and every one of them have a different way of writing. Like some people like love being out in coffee shops and like being around people, but other people need the quiet. And some people are morning writers, but some people are evening writers. Yeah. And I actually have not heard somebody that's an afternoon writer. And I love that because I don't really get started until after 11 a.m. I can't communicate.
Yes. Oh my God. And then I had to like dislodge so much shame from people's like, whatever my expectations, like, oh, you sleep until when? I was like, okay, did you not understand? I'm a bartender. You make money at night. I was like, so that's normal. Like, you know what I mean? For me, but
you're
my brain's on.
Did you say that you're going to start teaching?
Yeah, so I have been teaching. I'm already teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's where I got my MFA as a lecturer, but I just got a tenure track job, so I'll be an assistant professor starting in August.
Congratulations.
Huge.
So that means graduating from bartending, I guess. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Already done with that.
No, when I left my last job before I went to my MFA, so that was in 2016. First of all, just because I'm this kind of person, when I was like, oh, I'm gonna apply for MFAs, I like went into his office the next day. I was like, well, get ready to like have to replace me because I'm getting into graduate school. And he's like, okay. And then I did, but then like when I left that job, I was like, no, this is my last server job, promise. And it has been. So let's see.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you'll be moving to Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I lived there before, so I mean, I didn't like live there full time, obviously, but I lived there for 2 years, so I know I have winter clothes. That's what we're getting at. I have winter clothes.
Yeah,
I gotta get my husband some winter clothes, but he'll be okay.
So Mikhail asked a question. I listened to your book on audio. I thought it was really well read by Michelle Williams. As an artist, did you feel like the audio version represented the cadence and rhythm of your writing? Can you speak about the process of transforming your book to another medium? That's a really good question.
No, that's a super good question. And I think it's something that you don't know to even think about before like it happens, right? So so for me, I think my first part was like, oh, I want to read my books because like I know how that they sound, you know what I mean? And then, but that's also a lot of work. That's the other thing, like reading is work, like,
yeah,
you know, and it takes hours and hours and hours to record a book. So on the other hand, then I was like, you know what, actually it might be really cool to have somebody else read it. And so like it's this thing that exists outside of me, which makes it even more real. I think that she did a really great job reading the book. I don't think it sounds like how I have it in my head, but that's normal because like I'm me and I have my, you know what I mean? So, but I do think she did a really great job. And it was really cool to listen to somebody else's interpretation of the work. Yeah.
Yeah, we have another book club and a lot of our students listen to the audio version and they love the different voices and how that, and I've actually never listened to the audiobooks because I just love the tactileness of stuff.
I like to read
the weight. Yeah.
I'll listen to an audiobook like if I'm driving somewhere like long, like to Madison, for instance. But yeah, I like to just read it myself. But like audiobooks are great for people who like that.
So Lindsay Williams asked, I very much loved the Thicker Than Water story and wondered if you might talk about developing that and your inspiration for it.
Yeah, so for that story, I kind of had this idea in my head of siblings. So this is like the one instance where the characters came first, and not them in particular, right? But just like siblings who were estranged. And then, so when that came into my head, I was like, okay, well, what's the reason? Like, what's the thing? And how am I going to get them into a space together? And so then all of the other aspects started coming out. And so one of the things that for that story that was really important to me is I know that like, so that's another story that I think you have to be reading closely. You have to be paying attention so that you can understand like everything that happened by the time you get to the end. Yeah. But I think it was important to convey that story in that way because the main character of that story, she hasn't dealt with the thing that has happened to her. So and it's in first person. So if you have a first person story where the character hasn't dealt with something, it wouldn't make sense to me for that to be just laid out that way, right? So I kind of had to bury it under a couple of layers, you know what I mean? And so but still I wanted it to be clear, you know, at least pretty clear, like, okay, something happened, this is what probably happened, and now I understand what's happening. That's also another story. I love the ending of that story actually, because I think about, so I was actually walking and somebody was like ahead of me on the path and I was like, oh wow, they're so far away I can't tell if they're walking towards me or they're walking in the same direction as me. And so that was a separate thing that I wrote down. And then when I started doing this story, I was like, oh, that line, that thought belongs in this story, because I think that's a story where, you know, at the end of it, you don't know really how the brother and sister's relationship is going to be, but you can kind of infer like, you know, he's kind of moved on and made his own families and he's made his peace. And he's kind of like, well, I'm not going to be drawn into this world of illusion that you and mom are.
Yeah,
so
the mom's like you.
Exactly. You know, it's, you know, so I kind of feel like that's a story where you can look at it and see, wow, she's not going to get what she's after with her brother. I think that time has passed for them.
But he's also like, I mean, his girlfriend is a foot fetish, you know, so there is that element of, you know, he's not necessarily living this cookie cutter life. He's living a risque life.
Yeah.
Not to compare in, you know.
not cookie cutter, but he's living honestly, right? Like he has no shame whatsoever about what she does, just like she doesn't have any shame for what she does. This is what she does. That's how they make money. That's how they live, and they're okay with it. But you can see kind of the ways in which he's okay with the life that he has, and he doesn't need, like, you know what I mean? As much as she's like, oh, I hope he missed me, and I hope he's probably like, hey, I'm going to be honest about things, and if you can't do that, then we don't really have that much to say to each other.
I thought that was also brilliant of bringing in the third Shelby character in, where she kind of
I love her as a character.
Yeah, she was like the mirror of their relationship, where you didn't have to really have that they didn't have to go at it necessarily, because she kind of was that you know, spark between them. And she was the lovely, she was so fleshed out. All of the characters, like you can just like, there was this chunkiness to the book, you know, like it had this like it was a meal, you know, that, because you can read some stories and you're just like, what just happened? You know? And I mean, I definitely, like, I had to put, because as I said, I read this book like pretty quickly over a couple days, and I had to put it down and like walk away and take a walk around my apartment and like take a bath and like do yoga. Like I had to like get some distance from, because they haunt you.
I think the story does require some digestion. I agree. And I'm okay. I love that. And I'm okay with that. And I do think too, because, you know, you hear a lot, right? Oh, I don't like short stories, or I don't usually read short stories. And I think the thing with short stories that is off-putting to people is not necessarily that they don't like them, or they're too, you know, they're like, oh, I get attached and then we're moving on. I think it's the having to start again with a new set of characters that can become like, that's an investment, right? That's energy. So I think that that's maybe like the thing, but I do think of these stories as linked, even though the characters are not the same, right? And usually to call a collection linked, it has to be, oh, that's the same characters. But I wish we would broaden our definition of what constitutes a link, because place is a link, voice is a link, language is a link. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of, I think of the whole collection as kind of echoes and mirrors. All throughout, there are things pinging back and forth. All the stories stand on their own, but they're in conversation with each other.
And so talk about the title. Did you have this title in mind, or did you pick this after with all the different stories?
Yeah, so originally I thought, oh, this collection will be called Sticks and Stones. Like, you know, Sticks and Stones will break my bones, you know, like the whole thing. But then, you know, I was thinking about it and I was like, I guess not many people like name the story collection that's not a title of one of the stories in the collection.
Yeah.
But then, you know, that was separate. I'm sure I could have done that if I wanted to, but then I became less like enamored with the whole Sticks and Stones thing. So I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll call it an Almanac of Bones, because nobody else has that title. Like, it'll be its own unique thing. And then my friend who's my first reader, by the way, like I always give my stuff to her first, and she will tell me when I'm doing what I think I'm doing, and most importantly, when I'm not doing it yet.
Yeah, that's a gift.
Thing. And so she'll just say, she was just like, okay, yeah, Almanac of Bones. She goes, what about Milk, Blood, Heat? And I was just like, I mean, sure. I mean, you know what I mean? I wasn't convinced, and I went to sleep thinking about it and woke up thinking about it. And I think, you know, she was right, because it's a very, we talked about this briefly, right? It's a very elemental title. These are elemental words. These are physical words, milk, blood, and heat. And so it's milk that nourishes the body, right?
Yeah.
And blood of the living body, and heat, not just of Florida, but like of living bodies. Anything that's alive has heat or needs it to live. So it's kind of like basically what I'm doing in every story. I'm examining life. I'm examining like what it means to live a life. And so it just felt like once she said that, and then I was like, I had to call her. I had to be like, okay, you're right. It's no blood heat.
I wouldn't be surprised if you have more characters in this vein. You know, like I feel like you could have a whole other book of short stories, like with these kinds of because it's kind of like one of those inexhaustible topics of,
I mean, yeah, honestly, I say that all the time. I'm so interested in people, how we are, why we are, that kind of thing. And so as long as people are peopling, I'm always going to have something to write about.
I want to talk about the first story, because I keep saying I'm realizing this because I've been reading for 2 days. So I'm pretty feral. Yeah, I'm very feral because I've been in like books. We had 2 book clubs back to back. So I've been reading books for 5 days now. The story, because it was definitely not the normal spin of suicide, and not that there's a normal spin to suicide, but there's always this kind of I mean, it was a playfulness, like, oh, imagine if you got hit by a bus. Oh, imagine if you, and then to have it actually happen at the end, and the way that you ended it, that her friend knew that she did it just because she wanted to know what it feels like. Can you talk about that a little? Like what the intention, I said I was going to use that word, behind that whole bowl of milky blood soup. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah.
So first, I'm pretty sure when the first like thought of this story came to me, I don't remember what I was watching, but I was probably watching something like sad on Netflix, something with ennui, you know, like something like very atmospheric and like, you know, kind of like that. And I like to be in those modes sometimes. I'm just like lounging on the couch, I'm like, oh, my life, you know, like
once the cry is necessary.
Yeah, sometimes like, you know, feeling a little heavy, like makes me like realize my body is a living thing, or you know what, I don't know. So I was watching something and I was like, oh, morbid girls. And that's literally the first note in that folder of ideas, where it's just morbid girls. And then I think what was important for me to capture in that story is kind of like girlhood is kind of morbid, like, you know what I mean, like at least in the 90s when I was growing up, right, girlhood is portrayed as this like pink, you know, fluffy, frivolous type of, oh, girls and bubblegum, and you know what I mean. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure, but like we get periods, we start bleeding out of our bodies change, and like we're told that we're responsible for men and how they react to us, and we still don't understand that. And there's just like almost a feralness to like girlhood that I was like, that's how I kind of remember. Girlhood is really intense. Like it's joy and it's unfettered, but it's also like, you know, like little girls can be mean. I mean, like any children, but like if you have had a girlhood, you know what I'm talking about, like intense cruelty, but also intense love. Yeah. I also think that girlhood friendships are so formative. Like I can remember all the way back to whoever my friend was when I was 6 years old, 5 years old, whatever it was. They're so intense because you're learning how to be a person, and this is a person who mirrors what that's supposed to look like. And it's almost like the boundaries between you and that person start to dissolve. Like girl friendships are so, like you get close quick with somebody, like, oh, I've known you for 4 days, now we're like so I just wanted to capture some of that on the page. And in terms of just in general how I like to treat children is I think adults get to a certain point, some adults, not everybody, right, but they forget that children are humans, that they're people, that they have thoughts and feelings, and that, you know, they're complicated and nuanced more than we give them credit for, right? So I know that when I was that age, I was having thoughts like that. Like I used to wonder, like, why was I born a person instead of a tiger? You know, and I just wanted to like honor that.
I still do that. I'm still a 15-year-old.
Yes, exactly. I say that all the time. I will always be a child. Like I walk into a room, I'll be 32 in August, and I like walk into a room and I'm like, okay, where's the adult? And I'm like, oh, it's me. I'm the adult.
Yeah, try raising a child. You keep this human alive. I've kept her alive for 15 years and it blows my mind. We only have a couple minutes left, and I did want to say, I have two things. The moms in that story, because one was a African-American mom and one was a white mom. And then the way that you had the dialogue of how the moms saw each other. Well, you didn't really express Kira's mom, but she was like the free spirit, like
fluttery, airy sensation in the door. We get her in that last scene, but like, mostly, it's
and then, but I loved how you wrapped it up where you know, the mom that seemed more judgmental, Ava's mom, but it was really like she just was like a boundary. She was like a hands-on, like she's doing her hair at the end, she grounded her child. And where I'm going with the metaphors, where the daughter flies off a building, like she wasn't grounded, like that whole concept of flight and
of consequences, of life consequences. And that's an intentional choice too. I'll say that pretty much, I mean, everything in the book is intentional. It's a crafted medium, but I get comments about the differences between the two mothers, and someone said, oh, harsh. And I was like, no, I mean, but yes, it's a different parenting style. However, it is love. It is his mother who is Black in this world, understanding that her daughter is going to need to be, to have a little bit more and to survive. And she needs to be like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's like this different parenting style that they're going through where, you know, Ava feels like she can't be herself or express her feelings. And there is some dismissiveness happening there, but the mom was always seeing more than Ava thought that she saw. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I know I'm going to need to protect you. You're going to be into this whole world that's going to do everything it can to tear you down. And so like, You know what I mean? I'm going to be realistic with you about like how these things are.
I have one more question. And I'm glad you brought up that you grew up in the 1990s, because I noticed the absence of smartphones and the technology in this, like the dial-up and the phones where they have to actually call, and somebody asked what time it was and looked at his watch, and I'm like, why would this guy in a bar ask what time it was? Why wouldn't he just look at his cell phone? So what made you, because you never really know exactly, but even like the guy, he bought his new 1985 car, and he's 52, and it was like the car that was like his midlife crisis car. So was that like, did you want to not have media, social media and smartphones and technology a part of these stories?
So some of the stories are in the past and some are in the future. Like in Necessary Bodies, you know, she's texting Kia, oh, come, let's go to the museum. And then she sends her big plan emoji, right? Like,
yeah, you're right, right.
Yeah. So some of them are more modern, and some of them I was just like, you know, I just kind of want to go back to that, you know, the big clunky computer, and you got to, you know, go to, when you're at the mall with your friend, you got to get the quarter so you can do the payphone to call your mom to come pick you up. You know what I mean? Like, so some of them are in the past, some of them are more modern with the texting, but that is something that I think for my novel, it's probably not going to be as much of a problem because I'm setting it in like 2009. So there's still that kind of like, we haven't gotten to the point that we are yet. I do think, I don't know, like I want to write about things realistically, but also sometimes people use so much like references and technology and their stuff that I'm like, oh, this is going to be dated so soon. It's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with things being dated, but like, I don't think I'm as interested in like pulling up every single, you know, thing. Like I'm definitely going to have to mention MySpace for 2009, but
I joined Facebook in 2008. And it was just like, I wonder what this thing is. Like, what?
It took such a long time to get Facebook. I was like, no, MySpace is cool. You can put a music video on it. It's so much cooler.
Yeah.
That's where I learned coding, was MySpace.
Yeah, same. You had your little page. Oh man, I thought I was so cool. I was like, look at mine.
Right, absolutely. Well,
yeah, we're there.
Yeah, this was absolutely incredible. Dantiel, you are an absolute powerhouse. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited to see just all the things that you do. And where can everyone follow along with you? What's happening next?
You can just like type in my name. I'm most active on Instagram. I like pictures. So like that's the one that I most use. But I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram. I'm pretty much probably the only Dantiel. There might be like 1, 2 that pop up, but you can just follow me on Instagram or Twitter.
Very cool. I love your Instagram. We already talked about this. Follow along. It's a fun to see all the cool things that you're doing. So again, that was an incredible conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us and celebrating Milk, Blood, Heat, and really all things Florida with our FloridaRAMA book club. To stay in the loop with all things Fairgrounds, follow along on our social medias. You can join our Insiders Club, become a member today. We are hiring as well. And so to learn about all of those things, you can visit us at fairgrounds.art. To stay up to date with all of the Keep St. Pete Lit happenings, you can follow along on their social medias, check out their website, Keep St. Pete Lit. And don't leave just yet. We are joined Maureen and I next time as we have a conversation with best-selling author Tyler Gillespie to discuss his book, The Thing About Florida. Dantiel and Tyler will actually be doing a reading with a couple of local artists tomorrow as well.
Tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Yes, and the link is on your Instagram, and we'll go ahead and share it here as well. And so, yeah, thank you again, Maureen, and our special guest, Dantiel W. Moniz, for facilitating this conversation. And of course, thank you to the team at Fairgrounds St. Pete that made this happen. And shout out to Tombolo Books. I hope y'all have a great rest of your night and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.